Captain Vex'ilian of the Galactic Archaeological Survey stood on the bridge of his research vessel, the pretentious Endeavor, stroking all four of his chin tentacles in what he believed was a thoughtful manner. Before them hung the scorched husk of what their databases labeled as Sol 3, though the locals had apparently called it Earth before they'd done whatever spectacularly stupid thing had turned their planet into a cosmic barbecue pit. "Captain," squeaked Dr. Quibble, the ship's xenobiologist, his voice crackling through his breathing apparatus. "The atmospheric readings are still showing dangerous levels of radiation. Perhaps we should reconsider this expedition?" "Nonsense, Quibble," Vex'ilian boomed, his voice echoing dramatically off the bridge walls. "Science waits for no being. Besides, the radiation gives the whole place a rather poetic ambience, don't you think?" Professor Snark, their resident linguist, looked up from his translation matrix with the sort of smug expression that suggested he'd just solved the mysteries of the universe. "Actually, Captain, I've been analyzing the electromagnetic signatures from the surface, and I believe we've stumbled upon something extraordinary. There appears to be a massive stone structure on the northern continent, completely intact despite the planetary catastrophe." Vex'ilian's primary eyes lit up while his secondary ones rolled in opposite directions, a biological quirk that had made him famous at academic conferences. "A monument. Oh, this is perfect. Nothing says prestigious archaeological discovery like a good monument to a dead civilization." The away team materialized on Earth's surface in a shower of blue sparkles, immediately activating their environmental suits. The planet's surface was a testament to whatever cosmic temper tantrum had ended human civilization. Twisted metal structures jutted from the ground like the ribs of some enormous beast, and the sky had that particular shade of orange that screamed ecological disaster with a side of existential dread. But there, rising from the devastation like a middle finger to the cosmos, stood their prize. The structure was massive, easily 200 meters tall, made of some dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing with a faint blue energy that pulsed in a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. "Magnificent!" Vex'ilian gasped, his breathing apparatus fogging up with excitement. "Look at the craftsmanship. The attention to detail. This is clearly humanity's final statement to the universe, their ultimate monument to their own existence." Dr. Quibble approached the structure nervously, his scanner beeping frantically. "Captain, these readings are highly unusual. The stone appears to be some sort of advanced composite material, and there's a significant energy signature emanating from within the structure itself." "Obviously ceremonial," Vex'ilian dismissed with a wave of his upper right arm. "These primitive species always got overly dramatic about their funeral rites. Probably powered by some sort of primitive nuclear decay ceremony." Professor Snark was already hard at work with his translation equipment, his 6 eyes darting between the glowing symbols and his readouts. "The text appears to be in multiple human languages, but the primary inscription seems to be in what they called English. It's quite touching, really. Let me see here. In case of extinction, break glass? No, wait, that doesn't sound right. Let me recalibrate." The symbols continued their steady pulsing, and if any of the aliens had bothered to notice, they might have observed that the pulse was getting slightly faster. But they were far too busy congratulating themselves on their academic prowess to pay attention to such trivial details. "The artistic symbolism is profound," Vex'ilian continued, now circling the monument with the sort of reverent awe usually reserved for religious experiences or really good cafeteria food. "You can practically feel the despair radiating from every carefully carved line. The humans clearly knew their end was approaching and created this masterpiece as their final gift to the cosmos." Dr. Quibble's scanner gave a particularly alarmed beep. "Captain, I'm detecting what appears to be a sophisticated communication array built into the structure's foundation. This level of technology seems inconsistent with a funerary monument." "Nonsense, Quibble. You're thinking too literally. The humans were obviously trying to contact their afterlife with their primitive technology. Rather touching, really, in a pathetically hopeful sort of way." As the alien team continued their analysis, completely oblivious to the fact that they were essentially standing on top of a cosmic doorbell, the beacon continued its patient countdown. After all, it had been waiting for nearly 300 years. What was a few more minutes? The irony, of course, was completely lost on the aliens. They had stumbled upon humanity's ultimate insurance policy and mistaken it for a gravestone. But then again, that's exactly the sort of mistake you'd expect from a species that thought environmental suits were optional on a radioactive planet, and that glowing alien technology was probably just decorative lighting. The beacon pulsed once more, a little faster now, as if it was getting excited about something. 3 weeks later, the pretentious endeavor had been converted into a floating academic circus. Scholars from across the galaxy had descended upon the ship like particularly intellectual vultures, each convinced they held the key to understanding humanity's tragic final message. Professor Snark had established himself as the leading expert on human extinction poetry, having spent considerable time crafting increasingly elaborate translations of what were clearly warning labels. You see. He explained to a rapt audience of xenoarchaeologists, when the humans inscribed "stand back 500 meters," that they were obviously creating a metaphorical barrier between life and death. The number 500 represents the 5 senses plus the spiritual realm, while meters refers to the musical meter of their death songs. Dr. Quibble had reached entirely different conclusions through his biological analysis. "The evidence is overwhelming," he declared during his daily briefing. Humans possessed only 2 eyes, severely limiting their spatial awareness. They had a single heart, meaning no backup circulatory system. Most damning of all, they required external clothing for temperature regulation. Clearly, they were doomed from the moment they crawled out of whatever primordial soup spawned them. The good doctor had completely ignored the fact that the human skeletal remains they'd found were wearing what appeared to be advanced combat armor, and that several of the skeletons were clutching weapons that his scanners couldn't even identify. Details, really. Captain Vex'ilian, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity. His preliminary paper, Monument to Failure, Humanity's Last Desperate Cry for Relevance, had already been downloaded over 12 million times across the Galactic Academic Network. He'd started giving guided tours of the site, complete with dramatic reenactments of what he imagined were humanity's final moments. And here, he would gesture grandly at the beacon with his lower left arm while his upper right adjusted his ceremonial academic sash. We see the ultimate expression of human despair. They knew they were about to become extinct, so they built this monument to ensure that someone, somewhere, would remember their pathetic existence. The tours had become so popular that the Galactic Tourism Board had officially designated Earth as a cautionary heritage site. Vendors had set up souvenir stands selling "I visited Dead Earth and all I got was this depressing t-shirt merchandise." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a plasma torch. Dr. Blixen, a renowned expert in extinct civilizations from the University of Arcturus, had joined the research team and was busy developing her theory of human terminal pessimism. According to her calculations, humans had evolved to be so depressed about their own existence that they'd literally willed themselves out of existence through collective despair. "Look at their entertainment," she argued, displaying holographic examples of human media. They created fictional stories about their own destruction over and over again. Clearly, they were practicing for their own extinction. It's the most elaborate species-wide suicide note in galactic history. She had conveniently ignored the fact that most of those fictional stories ended with humanity triumphantly overcoming impossible odds, but usually while delivering sarcastic one-liners and blowing things up in spectacular fashion. Professor Snark, not to be outdone, had developed an even more elaborate interpretation. "The beacon itself tells the story," he announced during his daily translation update. This phrase here, which appears to read "they'll be back," is clearly a reference to the cyclical nature of existence. The humans were acknowledging that while their physical forms would perish, their spirits would return to the cosmic consciousness from whence they came. What the phrase actually said was, "they'll be back with friends, and they're going to be really annoyed." But Professor Snark's translation matrix had some interesting ideas about verb tenses in dead languages. The media attention had reached fever pitch. Galactic News Network was running hourly updates on the human mystery, complete with expert panels debating the philosophical implications of humanity's voluntary extinction. The Zephyrian Philosophy Channel had produced a 12-part documentary series called Death Becomes Them, a study in cosmic irony. Meanwhile, the beacon continued its patient countdown, its pulse now noticeably faster than when they'd first arrived. But the aliens were far too busy arguing about academic credit and publishing rights to notice such trivial details. Dr. Quibble had developed a particularly elaborate theory about human social structures, based on our analysis of their urban planning. He explained to anyone who would listen, humans deliberately built their cities in the most inefficient patterns possible. This suggests a species-wide death wish that manifested in their infrastructure. They literally built themselves into extinction. The fact that human cities had been designed to survive everything from earthquakes to orbital bombardment was apparently less interesting than his theory about suicidal architecture. Captain Vex'ilian had begun work on his autobiography, tentatively titled I Discovered Death, a hero's journey through academic excellence. He'd already secured a 3-book deal and was in talks with several production companies about the holodrama rights. None of them noticed that the beacon had started emitting a low-frequency hum that was causing migrating space whales in nearby sectors to change course, or that several automated monitoring stations throughout the galaxy had begun receiving strange signals that their computers were interpreting as wake-up calls. The aliens were having far too much fun being the smartest beings in the room to notice that they might not be as smart as they thought. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen such excitement. Representatives from 847 different species packed the amphitheater, their various forms of sensory organs all focused on the stage where Captain Vex'ilian stood basking in what he was absolutely certain was well-deserved glory. Distinguished beings of the galaxy, Vex'ilian began, his voice amplified by the hall's acoustic enhancement system. Today marks a pivotal moment in our understanding of extinction dynamics and evolutionary failure. The audience rippled with anticipation. The Crystalline Collective hummed in harmonic appreciation. The hive mind of Kepler-7 buzzed with synchronized excitement. Even the normally stoic silicon-based collective managed what passed for enthusiasm among their kind. For too long, we have wondered what causes a species to simply vanish from the cosmic stage. Today, thanks to our exhaustive research, we have found the answer. Vex'ilian activated the holographic display, showing the beacon in all its ominous glory. Behold a monument to human extinction, humanity's own admission of evolutionary defeat. The crowd erupted in appreciation. This was exactly the sort of concrete, scientific proof that the galaxy's academics had been craving. Finally, a clear example of how not to evolve. Counselor Bright Thoughts of the Andromedian Wisdom Collective raised a shimmering appendage. Captain Vex'ilian, what specific factors led to humanity's self-acknowledged failure? Excellent question, Counselor. Vex'ilian's ego inflated another few sizes. Dr. Quibble, please share your biological analysis. Dr. Quibble scuttled to the podium, his nervous system firing in patterns that created small light shows under his translucent skin. Thank you, Captain. Our analysis reveals that humans were fundamentally flawed from a biological standpoint. They possessed only 2 eyes, limiting their visual range to roughly 180 degrees. Their single-heart design created a catastrophic failure point, the most shocking of all. They had no natural defense mechanisms. No venom, no claws, no ability to photosynthesize. They were essentially walking prey animals that somehow developed delusions of grandeur. The audience made various sounds of disgust and pity across dozens of different vocal ranges. The methane breathers of Titan Prime expressed their horror through interpretive gas emissions. Professor Snark took his turn, practically vibrating with academic pride. The linguistic evidence supports our biological findings completely. The monument's inscriptions are filled with phrases like rest in peace and gone but not forgotten, clearly indicating a species that had accepted its own inevitable failure. Most telling is their repeated use of the phrase "we'll be back," which our cultural analysts interpret as a desperate fantasy about posthumous relevance. Counselor, vast mind of the telepathic union, projected a question directly into everyone's consciousness. What lessons should we derive from this discovery? This discovery proves that intelligence alone is insufficient for species survival, Vex'ilian declared, gesturing dramatically at the holographic beacon. Humans developed impressive technology, yes, but they lacked the wisdom to use it properly. They were too aggressive, too independent, too willing to take unnecessary risks. In short, they embodied everything a successful galactic species should avoid. The irony was so dense it was practically creating its own gravitational field. Here was a room full of beings who had achieved interstellar travel, conquered faster-than-light communication, and built a galactic civilization spanning millions of worlds, all congratulating themselves on being smarter than the species that had apparently built a monument capable of functioning perfectly after 3 centuries of planetary devastation. The Galactic Education Ministry immediately began incorporating the human failure model into their curriculum. Within days, alien children across thousands of worlds were learning about humanity as the ultimate cautionary tale. "Don't be like the humans," became a popular saying among alien parents trying to encourage better behavior in their offspring. Tourist companies began advertising extinction tours of Earth, complete with guided visits to the beacon and solemn reflections on the dangers of evolutionary overconfidence. The gift shop sold miniature replicas of the monument alongside books titled How Not to Go Extinct, Lessons from Humanity's Failure. News networks across the galaxy picked up the story with enthusiasm that bordered on the unseemly. Extinct species leaves embarrassing final message topped the galactic headlines for weeks. Talk shows featured panel discussions about the psychology of civilizational suicide. The whole galaxy was having a wonderful time feeling superior to a bunch of dead humans. Meanwhile, deep in space, automated monitoring stations that had been quietly dormant for centuries began receiving signals. Strange, persistent signals that seemed to be saying something about coordinates and arrival times. But the galaxy was far too busy celebrating its intellectual superiority to pay attention to such minor technical details. The beacon's pulse quickened just a tiny bit more, as if it was getting impatient. After all, it had been 300 years since the message gone fishing. Back soon had been carved into its base. How long did these aliens expect humanity to wait? The tour group from the Zephyrian Academy of Advanced Smugness had arrived on Earth with all the enthusiasm of beings who were absolutely certain they were about to witness something educational and morally improving. 47 students, 3 professors, and one very unfortunate chaperone named Mr. Glorbius materialized near the beacon in a cascade of sparkles and academic chatter. "Now, students," Professor Winworth announced in the sort of voice that suggested he'd practiced this speech in front of a mirror. "Let's observe how this monument represents the ultimate failure of aggressive evolutionary strategies. Notice the ominous black stone, clearly chosen to represent the darkness of human despair." Little Pip, a young Zephyrian with more curiosity than sense, wandered away from the group while the professor droned on about symbolic architectural choices and the psychology of civilizational suicide. The beacon was much more interesting than Professor Winworth's theories about extinct species, especially since it was covered in glowing symbols that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Pip's own hearts. "The humans clearly knew they were doomed," Professor Winworth continued, "which is why they chose to build their final monument from such depressing materials. Note the complete lack of bright colors or cheerful imagery. This is a species that had given up all hope." Pip reached out a small, 3-fingered hand toward one of the pulsing symbols. It looked almost like a button, and Pip had always been told that the best way to learn about things was through hands-on experience. Furthermore, Professor Winworth pontificated, the placement of this monument in the middle of a devastated landscape shows that humans wanted their failure to be visible from orbit, a final confession of their inadequacy broadcast to the cosmos itself. Pip's finger made contact with the symbol. The universe held its breath for exactly 1 nanosecond. Then the beacon exploded into light. Not literally exploded, mind you, because that would have been inconvenient for everyone involved. But every symbol on the monument suddenly blazed with the intensity of a small star, bathing the entire area in blue radiance that was probably visible from 3 solar systems away. The tour group froze in terror, their various sensory organs overloading as the beacon began to emit a sound that was part technological hum, part music, and part something that sounded suspiciously like laughter. The ground beneath their feet vibrated with harmonic frequencies that seemed to be saying, finally, someone with sense enough to push the obvious button. "Oh dear," squeaked Mr. Glorbius, the chaperone, as his emergency communication device started shrieking alerts. That's probably not supposed to happen, is it? The beacon's hum grew louder, and new symbols began appearing on its surface, scrolling upward like some sort of cosmic marquee. The text was unmistakably human, and even Professor Windworth's malfunctioning translation matrix couldn't misinterpret messages like signal received, deployment initiated, and ETA sooner than you think. Professor Windworth stared at his readings in mounting horror. "This isn't a monument," he whispered, his academic confidence crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. "This is some sort of communication device." High above them, space itself began to shimmer as the beacon's signal propagated outward at speeds that made faster than light travel look like a leisurely stroll. The message was simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. "Hey everyone, the coast is clear. Come on home." But then, Pip, meanwhile, was staring at the beacon with the sort of wide-eyed wonder that small children reserve for fireworks displays and imminent disasters. "Pretty," Pip said in perfect galactic standard, apparently unconcerned that they'd just accidentally triggered what was looking more and more like an interstellar wake-up call. The tour group's emergency evacuation was a masterpiece of panic and poor coordination. 47 students, 3 professors, and 1 overwhelmed chaperone attempted to materialize back to their ship simultaneously, but resulting in what their insurance company would later classify as an act of cosmic stupidity. Back on the pretentious endeavor, Captain Vex'ilian received the emergency transmission with the sort of calm that comes from complete denial of reality. "I'm sure it's nothing serious," he announced to his bridge crew. "Probably just some residual energy discharge from our excavation activities. These old monuments are known to be temperamental." The fact that his ship's sensors were now detecting energy signatures approaching from outside the galaxy was clearly just a technical malfunction. After all, everyone knew that humans were extinct. They had a monument that said so. Admiral Jackie Boom Boom Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the definitely not compensating, humanity's flagship vessel, watching the galaxy's edge grow larger through the view screen with the sort of grim satisfaction that comes from being right about something everyone else was wrong about. "MIAM," reported Lieutenant Commander Mike Numbers Peterson from the navigation station. "We're receiving confirmation signals from the beacon network. All 237 sites are green and ready." Outstanding numbers. How long since we left this cosmic neighborhood? According to the beacon timestamps, approximately 297 years, 4 months, and 16 days since the Great Relocation Protocol was initiated. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. The Great Relocation Protocol had been humanity's answer to the uncomfortable discovery that their home galaxy was about to experience what the astrophysicists had technically termed a really big explosion. Rather than stick around to argue with cosmic forces beyond their control, humanity had done what they did best: packed up everything that wasn't nailed down, but pried up everything that was, and moved to a nicer neighborhood. "Any word from the locals about our little calling card?" "Oh, they found it all right," grinned Communications Officer Lisa Static Kowalski from her station. "According to the Galactic Communication Intercepts, they've spent the last few weeks celebrating the discovery of humanity's extinction monument. They've been giving tours." The bridge crew erupted in laughter. It was exactly the sort of cosmic joke that made the 3-century journey worthwhile. "They've been charging admission to visit our emergency beacon?" Rodriguez asked, her eyebrows climbing toward her hairline. "It's better, Admiral. They've apparently concluded that we went extinct due to evolutionary incompetence. Something about having only 2 eyes and insufficient backup organs." Rodriguez looked around the bridge at her crew. Chief Engineer Bobby Sparks Martinez was currently regenerating a lost arm thanks to his military-grade medical enhancement package. Navigator Peterson's eyes had been replaced with cybernetic implants that could see across 17 different spectrums. Half the crew was showing various levels of technological integration that would have made the original human template unrecognizable. "Evolutionary incompetence," she repeated slowly. "How adorable." "Static, open a channel to the fleet." "Channel open, Admiral." "Attention all ships. This is Admiral Rodriguez. It appears our new neighbors have been having a wonderful time during our absence. They've turned our emergency beacon into a tourist attraction and decided we're extinct. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a powerful urge to prove them wrong. All ships, initiate final approach protocol. Let's go introduce ourselves properly. The response from the fleet was immediate and enthusiastic. 200 ships that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a serious grudge against aesthetic sensibility and a deep love of functional redundancy began moving toward Earth. Each vessel was a masterpiece of human engineering philosophy. If it worked, bolt more of it on until it couldn't possibly break. The definitely not compensating led the charge. Its hull adorned with decorative laser cannon arrays and motivational graffiti that included gems like "Extinction this and we're back, baby." The ship's external speakers, which had been retrofitted from an old concert venue, began broadcasting humanity's traditional return home anthem, a carefully curated playlist of songs that were specifically chosen to be audible across multiple dimensional frequencies. "Admiral," reported sensor specialist Tom Radar Johnson, "I'm picking up approximately 47 alien research vessels in Earth orbit. They appear to be studying our beacon." "Studying our beacon," Rodriguez repeated, her voice taking on the tone of someone who was beginning to see the humor in the situation. "Static, can you patch me into their communications?" "Already on it, Admiral. You're going to love this." The bridge speakers crackled to life, broadcasting the panicked chatter of alien academics who had just realized that they're extinct. The research subjects were currently approaching at high speed in ships that looked like they'd been assembled by someone with access to a military surplus store and a complete disregard for safety regulations. "This is Captain Vex'ilian of the Galactic Archaeological Survey. We demand to know who you are and why you're approaching our research site." Rodriguez keyed the communication system with a grin that would have terrified anyone who knew her reputation. "This is Admiral Rodriguez of the Terran Resurrection Fleet. We're here to collect our mail and find out who's been throwing parties on our lawn while we were out." The silence that followed was so profound it could have been used to power a small star. 6 months later, the Galactic Council chamber had undergone what humans cheerfully called aggressive redecorating. The formal seating arrangement had been replaced with something that Admiral Rodriguez described as more democratic, which apparently meant a collection of comfortable chairs arranged in a circle around a central table that was permanently stocked with coffee, donuts, and what humans insisted on calling meeting snacks. Captain Vex'ilian sat in his designated chair, wearing what had become his permanent expression of bewildered resignation. His autobiography had been retitled "I Was Completely Wrong About Everything," a humbling experience in academic hubris, and was required reading in xenoarchaeology programs across the galaxy, though not for the reasons he'd originally hoped. "So let me get this straight," said Admiral Rodriguez, leaning back in her chair with a coffee mug that read Galaxy's one not dead person. "You all spent 3 centuries convinced that humans were extinct, and your evidence was a monument that literally had 'We'll be back' written on it in 17 different languages?" Counselor Bright thoughts of the Andromedian Wisdom Collective flickered with embarrassment. "In our defense, your species has a documented history of dramatic overstatement. We assumed it was metaphorical." "Metaphorical," Rodriguez repeated slowly. "You thought 'We'll be back' was a metaphor." "Humans do seem fond of hyperbole," offered Dr. Quibble weakly. "Your entertainment media is filled with impossible scenarios and exaggerated emotional responses." Rodriguez gestured to Lieutenant Commander Peterson, who activated a holographic display showing human colonization efforts across the Andromeda Galaxy. "Dr. Quibble, meet hyperbole. We've established 17 major colony worlds, 43 research stations, 12 mining operations, and 1 really excellent barbecue restaurant. We call it progress, but I can see how you might mistake it for metaphor." The Galactic Council had undergone what historians would later describe as rapid administrative restructuring, which was a polite way of saying that humanity had arrived, that looked at how things were being run, and decided that immediate improvements were necessary. The changes had been implemented with characteristic human subtlety, meaning they'd essentially rebuilt the entire governmental structure over a weekend, while the aliens were still trying to figure out how to apologize for, well, the whole extinct species thing. Professor Snark had been reassigned to work directly with human linguists, an experience he later described as educational in ways that violated several psychological safety protocols. It turned out that human language contained levels of sarcasm and irony that could actually cause mental distress to species that had evolved without predators. His first attempt to translate human humor had resulted in a 3-day stay in the medical bay. The adjustment period has been challenging, admitted Counselor Vast Mind during one of the new weekly "How Are We Doing?" sessions that Admiral Rodriguez had instituted. Humans approach problem-solving in ways that our strategic planning algorithms find difficult to predict. This was a diplomatic way of saying that humanity's solutions to galactic problems tended to involve approaches that no sane species would consider, implemented with tools that probably shouldn't exist, and completed with a level of cheerful chaos that left everyone else wondering if they'd missed something important. The Beacon, meanwhile, had been converted into the galaxy's most popular coffee shop. Phoenix Rising Espresso served beverages that were somehow simultaneously caffeinated and educational, with menu items like the Extinction Special. A coffee so strong it could wake the dead, and the misunderstanding. A complicated drink that wasn't what you ordered but was somehow exactly what you needed. Pip, the young Zephyrian who had started the whole mess, had become something of a celebrity and was now the official ambassador of accidental discoveries. The job mostly involved making sure that important buttons were clearly labeled and that tourists understood the difference between historical monuments and active military equipment. Dr. Quibble had been assigned to study human biological impossibilities, a research project that was yielding fascinating results about what evolution could accomplish when a species was too stubborn to acknowledge physical limitations. His preliminary findings suggested that humans had essentially bullied biology into submission through sheer determination and creative application of technology. Admiral Counselor Bright Thoughts asked during one of their regular meetings, what exactly was humanity doing for 3 centuries? Your technology seems to have advanced considerably during your absence. Rodriguez smiled, an expression that had become familiar to the galactic leadership and still made most of them nervous. Oh, you know how it is. We explored a few galaxies, made some friends, picked up some new hobbies. Standard human stuff. The fact that making friends apparently meant accidentally starting 3 different galactic renaissance movements, and new hobbies included revolutionizing faster-than-light travel through creative applications of duct tape and human stubbornness, was information that the Admiral felt was probably too much for the Council to process all at once. The galaxy was slowly adapting to its new reality. Humanity wasn't extinct, they weren't going away, and they had opinions about how things should be run. Most of those opinions involved more coffee shops, better emergency protocols, and a general policy that important things should have clear warning labels. As Admiral Rodriguez liked to say during her weekly addresses to the Galactic Council, we're back, we're caffeinated, and we have 3 centuries worth of improvements to implement. Try to keep up. The beacon continued its gentle pulse, now serving as both a monument to cosmic misunderstandings and a reminder that sometimes the most obvious explanation is exactly what it appears to be, especially when humans are involved. After all, when a species puts up a sign saying we'll be back, the smart money is usually on taking them at their word.